Okay, hello, my name is Chloe Lockenauer. I'm going to be doing my personality disorder video presentation over Atypical, which is a TV series on Netflix. The board is basically just for me to read off, so if you can't read any of this, that's fine. I'm going to be saying all of it anyways. A brief summary of the show, it's about a boy named Samuel Gardner. He's 18 and he's living on the spectrum, which means that he has autism, which means I will be doing my presentation over autism in case you didn't catch on to that. I like this show a lot because it shows the seriousness of autism, but it's not a dramatic show like I know another show that has a character with autism is The Good Doctor, and that show is very much drama, while this one is very lighthearted and funny, but it still shows the seriousness of like his autism and how it affects him and how it affects his family. Another reason I like this show is that it also doesn't just deal with his autism, or his autism is not the source of his family's problems like a lot of other shows or movies might make it out to be. The personality disorder is not the cause of all the problems in the family. Like there are normal things happening, like his younger sister is having boy troubles, and his parents are having relationship troubles and things of that nature, but it's not primarily focused around his autism like most other shows would probably make it out to be. I was gonna say something else, but I forget. I did prep for this video by watching a couple of episodes and snippets from the show, specifically the first episode, because it gives the watcher a lot of information right off the bat, just so you kind of know a little more about a person on the spectrum than you did prior to watching the show, or if you had never known anything about a person living on the spectrum. And that is what they call it in the show. They never say, because I believe they mentioned that it's wrong if you refer to someone as, oh, like my autistic son or my autistic brother. That's putting the disorder before the person, so it's preferred that you say my son with autism, or if I were to refer to him as Sam with autism, or the main character with autism, or just refer to him as on the spectrum. So I hope I'm not messing that up as well. So basically the signs of autism and examples of autism in Atypical and in our main character Sam. The first one is really common. It's communication difficulties. The example of this in the show is, I'm pointing over here because my TV is right here and I have it like frozen on the TV, so sorry if I do that a lot. So Sam does this by, he narrates the show and he talks in monotone, and also he has a slight pattern in the way he talks. He takes specific pauses in between certain words or in certain points of his sentences, which is really interesting. I also read that a lot of children who, or one of the earlier signs of autism in a child is when they develop speech at a later age than most children, and also if you call their name, it'll appear as if they're deaf, because they won't typically respond to their name, or you'll have to say their name several times before they actually respond. So that's one of the symptoms. Avoiding eye contact. So Sam does this when there's a scene where he's in his school and the camera pans to him. More often than not, his head will be down. He will be looking at the floor. He does not make eye contact with anyone in his school when he's walking through the halls. They even show this in the very first episode. He's talking about his school, and it's showing everyone around him, and then it pans to him, and he's looking down. He's holding onto his backpack, and he has his headphones on. And I'll get to the headphones later. He also what is that? Oh, he, later on in the first episode, I'll be referring to the first episode mostly. Later on in the first episode, he is asking his therapist how to flirt, and she tells him, well, she says something along the lines of, you'll make eye contact and then you'll look away. And he responds with, how can I make eye contact and then look away? And then he references some sort of shrimp who has, what is that called? Bug eyes? I don't know, they're cross-eyed or something like that. He doesn't really understand the concept of, like, either not maintaining direct eye contact or looking away and making eye contact, and something along that line. He just doesn't really understand what she's telling him to do. So avoiding physical contact is another sign of autism. Throughout the show, his family often asks him for permission to hug him when he's upset, or hug him when they're happy for him, and things of that nature. And when they do, they hug him. You can actually, in the show, which is really interesting, you can see they like physically squeeze him because he says that it has to be a hard touch. I like pressure, so that means that he just really does not like the soft touch. He's very sensitive to touch, and especially when his sister hugs him, she always makes it hard and quick. It may seem odd like when you're watching it, but if you actually know that like that's what he prefers, she just really quickly hugs him because she understands that he doesn't really like the touch. Being over or undersensitive to the 5 senses. So the example that's in the show is the headphones. He does not like loud noises. He goes out on a date to a coffee shop and it freaks him out. So his solution is to wear the headphones, but even the headphones aren't enough because the coffee shop's so loud. And so he ends up asking his date very inappropriate questions. Another example of this is that he takes the bus, and when he sits on the bus, he leans very, very forward, and people look at him like he's crazy, but he doesn't like the feeling of the bus seat on his back. What else? Oh, also in the first episode, his mother is telling his father that she called the shirt company of his favorite shirt because they they started making their shirts with a tri-blend, which I don't know what that means, but they started making their shirts with a tri-blend, and Sam immediately noticed, and he didn't like it at all because he likes 100% cotton. And so she called them, and they sent all of the 100% cotton shirts that they had left over to her. What do I have for this? Oh, for this, some of the quotes: he hates touching the pens at the bank. He hates to eat raisins because he doesn't like to eat wrinkly things. He also says, my school is crowded and noisy and it smells weird. And I think that's all of the quotes I have for that one. So he becomes upset by minor changes. Later on in the show, his little sister gets angry at him, and she kind of knows that he easily gets upset by these minor changes, and so she unmakes his bed. I can't remember if she unmakes his bed completely or if she just folds back the covers, but I'm pretty sure she just folds back the covers. And she also moves his toothbrush from like one cup that he has where his toothbrush usually goes to another cup in his restroom, and he gets very upset when she does that. Yes, that's all I have for that. So he takes everything literally, and this is really apparent by the things he says or what he talks about. Someone will say something to him and he will immediately respond with a very literal answer or a literal response. When in the first episode his therapist asks if he wants to donate his brain to science. And he gets really confused at first, and then she has to further explain to him that it's after he has passed, not now while he's alive. Because initially when he's asked that question, it's like he interprets it as, oh, they're going to take my brain out of my body now. How will I function without my brain? I kind of need that. Another thing is he's talking to his therapist, and he's talking about scaring a girl away, and somehow the conversation leads to his mom making meatloaf, and he says, my mom made meatloaf twice and I hate meatloaf, and she asks him how, and he says in the oven. So instead of responding like, she had responded, like, how could you hate meatloaf, basically, but that's what she had meant by the how, and he had responded by telling her how his mother had made the meatloaf instead. He also says, whoever said practice makes perfect is an idiot. Humans can't be perfect because we're not machines. What else? I think that's all I have for that one. He's also very blunt whenever he says things. And I think that might fall under this category. But they're sitting at the dinner table after his therapy session, and his mother's asking him how it went, and he tells his mother, I'm not quite sure how he words it, but he tells his mother that his therapist wants him to donate his brain. He said, don't worry, it'll be after I'm dead. And then his mother responds like, well, would you actually like that, or why would you want to do that? Something along those lines. And he responds with, I either donate my brain or the maggots will get them. And then his sister says that that's kind of harsh, and he said, well, if mom wants maggots to eat my brain, like, who am I to stop her, that kind of thing. And he also says, I don't care, I'll be dead, do what you want with my brain. Repeating words or phrases. So Sam usually does this unknowingly whenever he's in high stress. He doesn't really realize it, but I've started to pick up as I watch the show that he usually repeats the phrases that other people say whenever there's kind of tension in the room. So his sister gets in trouble for punching someone in school, and while his parents are busy arguing with her and dealing with her and her punishment, he's in the background and he's listening, and she calls the girl that she punched a twat. And so the phrase kind of sticks in Sam's head, and he repeatedly under his breath just says twat, 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 until finally something pushes him over the edge and he screams it at another person. He also does this in one of the later seasons whenever he's in a group therapy session with other other teens who are on the spectrum, and most of them are heading off to college, and one of the kids there says, I forget what number it is, but she says there's a low percentage of kids on the spectrum who, first of all, get into college, and then second of all, make it all the way through college, and this kind of freaks Sam out, and it stresses him out, and so he repeats the number in his head, repeats it until, again, something pushes him over the edge and he screams the number at someone. Repetitive motion. So kind of in a way that some people have with OCD. I don't want to like compare it or anything because I may be wrong, but when he closes his closet door, he has to knock on the door 4 times. He also has a rubber band and a pencil that he carries around with him everywhere to self-stimulate himself, and he'll click the rubber band 4 times and then he'll stop, and then he'll click the rubber band 4 more times and then stop. And I don't know if this is because maybe he has autism and then also OCD, if that's what the show is trying to portray, but repetitive motions is also a symptom of autism. And when he's stressed, he will move his bed to the middle of the room and he'll walk in circles around it. He does this also whenever he's trying to make up his mind about a decision, and whenever he gets, no, I don't want to say assuming whenever he gets happy, but after he asks the girl out and she says yes, he spins in circles, which is another thing that people with autism do. They will often rock back and forth or spin. Lack of social cues. When he was little, his mom made him emotion cards, and in the earlier episodes, it's kind of clear whenever he, like when his brain digs back into like the emotion cards that he used when he was younger. So basically they had pictures of kind of like emojis on them, and then it said the emotion. So happy had a smiling emoji, and sad had like a frowning emoji. And so later on, when his friend tells him to smile at a girl in order to get her attention, he smiles really, really big and kind of comically because he's retrieving his memory from the social cards. Also in the later episodes, his mom finds a board game that she made for him, and I think she called it Sam Goes on a Walk. Not that the name's important or anything, but basically you would move your character, and then the card that you picked up that determined whether or not you went forward or backwards would have a social situation on it, and how you have to answer correctly how you're supposed to act, and if you answer correctly you can move forward. So one of them was you're walking down the sidewalk and you run into the mailman. What do you do? And so the appropriate response would be like maybe say hello to them, or something like that, or something along those lines. And so that's kind of a game that she made up to him so he could learn how to react appropriately in social situations. And then the last one, another one that I have for lack of social cues. This also kind of goes into things that he says that are like kind of inappropriate at certain times. So in the first episode, when he's sitting down with his therapist, he says, "I can see your bra, it's purple," which is something you really shouldn't say if you see someone's bra. You just kind of ignore it and let it be. Or if you do say something, they were talking about something completely different, and yeah. He goes on a date with a girl, and she says, "I always thought my nose was a little too big," and he says, "Yeah, a little," which is, again, not something you should say to someone because that is considered rude, but he doesn't know any better. The "I don't care, I'll be dead" thing with his brain is another example of that when he's sitting at the table with his mom. Again, not something you should really bring up or say to your mother, at least, about you and being dead. And then whenever he goes out on the date again, he also tells her, he finds the girl through a dating app, and her bio says that she has a cat named Simba, and so he gets overly stressed out on the date, and he though he may or may not know if it's right or wrong, he says, "I don't like cats, would you be willing to get rid of Simba for me?" Which you don't really ask someone to get rid of their cat on a first date, or you don't ask someone to get rid of their cat in general. And then the last symptom I have, or sign of autism that I have, is obsessive interest. So Sam, whenever presented with a new subject, will often do extensive research, and he talks a lot about how he loves to do research, and he talks about that with his therapist a lot too. So the first season really focuses on Sam understanding that people date, or people his age date, or people his age begin to find love, and he wants to experience that as well. And so he does research on how to go on a date with a girl, how to flirt with a girl, how to talk to girls, and things like that. And though he does the kind of wrong research because he watches some boys at his school very inappropriately hit on some girls, and then he writes it down and then recites it back to one of the girls he goes on a date with. But he does do extensive research, and then later on in the seasons, it also shows he has lots and lots of notebooks from research that he's done all throughout his years, so he can kind of learn and things like that. One of the biggest signs of his obsessive interest and stuff like that is Antarctica and like the Arctic. He really enjoys Antarctica and the Arctic. He relates everything back to Antarctica. He's very obsessed with penguins. He knows everything about penguins. He draws penguins. What else does he do? Oh, whenever he's stressed, I have it right here. When I'm stressed, I recite the 4 species of Antarctic penguins: Adelie, Chinstrap, Emperor, and Gentoo, and he says it helps. So that's also kind of a coping mechanism for him whenever he knows that he's stressed. If he cannot readily get to something that can help him, like if he's in his home and he's stressed, he goes to his room and he circles his bed. But if he's out in public and he can't really do that, he will recite the penguins. But he is very obsessed with Antarctica, and you cannot go one episode of this show without hearing about Antarctica or penguins. So that's also something that's very interesting. I believe that is all I have on Atypical. It's a very good show. Please watch it. I recommend it. And that is what I learned about autism and living on the spectrum.